The morning sun cast long shadows across the private aviation terminal as Dr. Maya Bennett's black Mercedes pulled up to the entrance. It was 6:30 a.m., and the terminal was just beginning to buzz with early morning activity. The air felt crisp and full of promise, but Maya had no time to enjoy it. Somewhere 2 states away, a patient's life hung in the balance. At 36 years old, Dr. Bennett had already made a name for herself as one of the country's top neurosurgeons. Her steady hands and brilliant mind had saved countless lives, and today would be no different. She had received an urgent call late last night about a complex brain tumor case that required her expertise. The local doctors weren't equipped to handle such a delicate procedure, and time was running out for the patient. Maya checked her appearance in the car's mirror one last time. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her navy blue pantsuit was wrinkle-free despite the rush to get ready. She had learned early in her career that appearance mattered, especially for a black woman in her position. Every detail had to be perfect, every I dotted and every T crossed, just to be taken as seriously as her peers. The driver opened her door, and Maya stepped out, her heels clicking against the polished concrete. She carried 2 bags, her leather briefcase containing her medical credentials, flight documentation, and laptop, and a small overnight bag with essential clothes and toiletries. The private jet company had arranged everything perfectly. They'd promised the flight would take only 2 hours, giving her plenty of time to reach the hospital and prep for surgery. As she walked toward the terminal entrance, Maya noticed how different this place was from the main airport. Everything here screamed exclusivity, from the marble floors to the crystal chandeliers hanging from the high ceilings. The usual airport chaos was replaced by a calm, ordered atmosphere. A few other travelers sat in plush leather chairs, sipping coffee and reading newspapers. They'd all seemed to belong here, their expensive clothes and confident postures marking them as regular private jet customers. Maya felt her phone buzz in her pocket. It was a text from Dr. Williams, the surgeon at St. Mary's Hospital who had called her in for the case. "Any update on your arrival time? Patient's family is asking." She quickly typed back, "Just arriving at the terminal now. Should be there by 9:30 a.m. She added a professional smile emoji. A small touch of warmth she allowed herself in medical communications. The weight of responsibility settled on her shoulders as she thought about the young patient waiting for her. Sarah Chen was only 19, a college freshman whose future hung by a thread because of an aggressive brain tumor. When Maya had reviewed the scans last night, she knew this would be one of her most challenging cases. But that's why she had become a neurosurgeon, to take on the cases others couldn't handle. As she approached the security checkpoint, Maya already had her ID and credentials in hand. She'd done this routine dozens of times before at other private terminals. Her reputation often meant she was called to different states for complex cases, and private jets had become a necessary tool in her life-saving work. Time was always of the essence in her profession, and commercial flights were too unreliable for emergency cases. Maya noticed a security guard watching her intently from his post. He seemed different from the usually polite and professional staff she encountered at these terminals. His gaze followed her every move, and something about his expression made her instinctively straighten her spine and lift her chin slightly higher. After 15 years in medicine, she had developed a sixth sense for these situations. She glanced at her watch, 6:35 a.m. The flight was scheduled for 7:00 a.m., giving her plenty of time to clear security and board. Somewhere in the back of her mind, a small voice whispered that something felt off about this morning, but Maya pushed the thought aside. She had a surgery to perform, a life to save. Nothing else mattered. Taking a deep breath, Dr. Maya Bennett walked toward the security checkpoint, her credentials ready, and her mind already focused on the complex procedure ahead. She had no way of knowing that the next few minutes would spark a chain of events that would change not only her life, but the entire private aviation industry. Security guard Richard Palmer stood at his post, his face hardening as Dr. Maya Bennett approached. He had worked at this private terminal for 8 years, and he had certain ideas about who belonged here and who didn't. The moment he saw Maya walking toward him, he made up his mind. No matter what papers she had, she wasn't getting past him today. "Excuse me, ma'am," Palmer called out, stepping directly into Maya's path. His voice was loud enough to make several nearby travelers look up from their phones and newspapers. "The main terminal is in the other building. This is private aviation only." He gestured toward the exit with his right hand while keeping his left hand resting on his security belt. Maya kept her expression neutral, though her heart had started beating faster. She'd faced situations like this before, but it never got easier. "Good morning, sir," she said clearly, holding out her credentials and flight documentation. "I'm Dr. Maya Bennett. I have a chartered flight scheduled for 7 a.m. Here are all my papers." Palmer barely glanced at the documents. "There must be some mistake," he said, his voice dripping with fake concern. "These private flights are usually for—" He paused, looking her up and down, "different kinds of clients. Are you sure you're not supposed to be at the main terminal?" Maya took a deep breath, keeping her voice steady. "No mistake, sir. I'm a neurosurgeon heading to St. Mary's Hospital for an emergency surgery. My flight has been arranged by the hospital. You can verify all of this." She pulled out her medical license and hospital ID, adding them to the documents already in her hand. A small crowd was starting to gather now, though people tried to pretend they weren't watching. Among them was a young Asian woman who had stopped scrolling through her phone and was now paying close attention to the scene unfolding before her. "Well," Palmer drawled, "we have additional security protocols we need to follow. Can't be too careful these days." He made a show of slowly flipping through Maya's documents, holding them up to the light as if checking for forgeries. "Where did you say you got these credentials from?" Maya felt her patience being tested, but she knew she had to stay calm. Any show of anger would only make things worse. "Harvard Medical School," she replied evenly. "And my board certification is from Johns Hopkins. As you can see, everything is in order. My patient is waiting, and this surgery is time-sensitive." Palmer smirked. "Harvard, Hopkins, that's quite a claim." He turned to his colleague at the desk. "Hey, Mike, what do you think about these credentials?" The way he said the word credentials made it clear he didn't believe they were real. Before Mike could respond, Maya pulled out her phone. "Sir, I'm happy to have you call the charter company, or better yet, I can have the hospital's chief of surgery call you directly. Would that help resolve this situation?" Her voice remained professional, but there was a steel edge to it now. "Oh, we'll need to do much more than that," Palmer said, handing her documents back with deliberate slowness. "We'll need to run a complete background check. Might take an hour or two. Can't let just anyone on these private jets, you understand. These are very expensive aircraft." Maya checked her watch. It was now 6:45 a.m. The patient's surgery couldn't be delayed. She felt her chest tighten with worry, not for herself, but for the young girl waiting for her in another state. "Sir," she said, her voice firm but still controlled, "I don't believe you're running similar checks on other passengers. I've shown you more than enough documentation to verify my identity and my flight authorization." Palmer crossed his arms, planting himself more firmly in her path. "Are you accusing me of something, ma'am? Because that kind of attitude isn't going to help your situation." His voice had taken on a threatening tone. The young Asian woman who had been watching pulled out her phone and started recording. She wasn't trying to hide it. She held her phone up openly, capturing every word and gesture of Palmer's discriminatory behavior. Maya noticed the recording but kept her focus on Palmer. She had dealt with prejudice before, had faced doubters and bigots throughout her career, but she had never let them stop her from saving lives. She wouldn't start now. Standing at her full height, diploma in one hand and medical license in the other, she prepared to stand her ground. A young girl's life depended on her getting on that plane, and no racist security guard was going to prevent that from happening. Sarah Chen couldn't believe what she was seeing. Just last month, she had attended a medical conference where Dr. Maya Bennett had given an amazing speech about breakthrough brain surgery techniques. Now, here was that same brilliant surgeon being treated like a criminal. Sarah's hands shook slightly as she held her phone steady, making sure to capture every moment of this injustice. With over 2 million followers on social media, Sarah usually posted about fashion and travel. But today, she knew she had to document something far more important. She stepped a little closer, making sure her phone caught both Palmer's sneering face and Dr. Bennett's dignified composure. Other travelers had stopped pretending not to watch. An elderly white businessman closed his newspaper and frowned at Palmer. A flight attendant waiting for her next assignment pulled out her own phone and started typing rapidly. Two pilots standing near the coffee machine whispered to each other, their faces showing clear disapproval of Palmer's behavior. "I know exactly who Dr. Bennett is," Sarah suddenly spoke up, her voice clear and strong. She was the keynote speaker at last month's International Medical Conference. I was there. Palmer's head snapped around to look at her, but Sarah didn't flinch. I'm recording everything, by the way. I think my followers would be very interested in how this private terminal treats one of the country's top neurosurgeons. Palmer's face reddened, but he didn't back down. This isn't your business, miss. Please step back, or I'll have to ask you to leave too. His hand moved to his security belt again, a gesture that didn't go unnoticed by Sarah's camera. The elderly businessman stood up. Young man, he said to Palmer, I've been flying private for 30 years, and I'd never seen such a disgraceful display. Do you realize this woman is trying to get to a patient? His voice carried the weight of authority that came with age and success. More people began to speak up. A woman in a business suit said loudly into her phone, Yes, I need to speak to the terminal manager immediately. This is unacceptable. The flight attendant had disappeared down a hallway, presumably to alert someone in charge. Dr. Bennett remained remarkably calm as chows erupted around her. She checked her watch again, 6:50 a.m., 10 minutes until their scheduled departure. Somewhere, Sarah Chen was still there, a young woman's life hung in the balance, and every minute counted. Sarah moved closer to Dr. Bennett while keeping her phone trained on Palmer. Dr. Bennett, she said respectfully, I still remember your speech about time being critical in neurosurgery. How urgent is your case today? She asked the question loud enough for everyone to hear. Maya answered professionally, her voice carrying across the now quiet terminal. I have a 19-year-old patient with a brain tumor that needs immediate attention. Every minute of delay increases her risk. She turned to Palmer. Sir, I understand you're doing your job, but I'm trying to do mine, saving a young woman's life. The crowd's murmurs grew louder. Sarah's followers were already responding to her live stream. Comments poured in. This is outrageous. Let her through. What's the name of this terminal? The hashtag Let Her Bennett flag was starting to trend. A mother with 2 young children stepped forward. My husband had brain surgery last year, she said, her voice shaking. If his surgeon had been delayed like this. She couldn't finish the sentence, but her eyes filled with tears. The pilots who had been watching walked over to Palmer. Rick, one of them said quietly, you need to let Dr. Bennett through. This isn't right, and you know it. The other pilot added, her credentials are valid. We've flown other doctors on emergency calls before. Sarah's phone buzzed with notifications. Her video was going viral, being shared by major social media accounts and even some news outlets. The terminal's name and location were being identified by internet users. Comments and reactions were flooding in from around the world. Through it all, Dr. Bennett stood her ground, neither angry nor afraid, but resolute. Her patient needed her, and she would not be turned away by bigotry. The growing crowd of witnesses in Sarah's viral video were making it clear. This was not an isolated incident to be brushed aside, but a moment of truth that would demand accountability. The sound of rapid footsteps echoing across the marble floor made everyone turn. Amanda Torres, the charter company's lead representative, was rushing toward the security checkpoint. Her face showed a mix of concern and anger as she took in the scene. The crowd of onlookers, Sarah's recording phone, Palmer's hostile stance, and Dr. Bennett's patient composure. What's going on here? Amanda demanded, slightly out of breath. She had been alerted by multiple people in the last few minutes. The flight attendant, several angry customers, and even the pilots. Her phone had been buzzing non-stop with messages about a discrimination incident at her terminal. Palmer straightened up, trying to look professional. Just following security protocols, Ms. Torres. This person claims to have a private flight booked. He emphasized the word claims while giving Maya another dismissive look. Amanda's eyes narrowed. This person, she said sharply, is Dr. Maya Bennett, and yes, she absolutely has a flight booked. I handled the arrangements myself last night. She turned to Maya with an apologetic expression. Dr. Bennett, I am so sorry for this delay. Your flight is ready and waiting. But Palmer wasn't done. He stepped forward again, blocking the path. Ms. Torres, we still need to complete the additional security checks I mentioned. It's procedure. His voice had taken on a stubborn tone, even in the face of his superior. What additional checks? Amanda's voice was ice cold now. I've worked here for 5 years, and I've never heard of these additional checks you're talking about. She gestured to the other travelers in the terminal. Were any of these passengers subjected to extra security measures this morning? The elderly businessman who had spoken up earlier called out, "I certainly wasn't." Walked right through with a simple ID check. Others in the crowd nodded in agreement. Sarah Chen made sure to capture all of this on her still recording phone. Dr. Bennett spoke up, her voice steady but urgent. "It's now 6:55 a.m. My patient's surgery can't be delayed much longer. Perhaps we could discuss these security protocols after I board my flight." She held up her credentials again. "Everything is in order, as your representative has confirmed." Amanda nodded firmly. "Of course, Dr. Bennett. Please, follow me." She moved to lead Maya past the checkpoint, but Palmer suddenly spread his arms, creating a physical barrier. "I can't let you do that," he said. "It's a security risk. We don't know if these credentials are real. They could be fake. I need to protect the aircraft and other passengers." His face was red now, his prejudice fully exposed in front of the growing crowd. Amanda's patience snapped. "Officer Palmer, step aside immediately. Dr. Bennett is a highly respected surgeon traveling for an emergency procedure. Her credentials have been verified multiple times. The only security risk I see right now is you preventing a doctor from reaching her patient." The two pilots who had been watching stepped forward again. The older one spoke firmly. "We're ready to fly Dr. Bennett to her destination. We've reviewed her paperwork, and everything is in order. We need to take off in the next few minutes to maintain our flight schedule." Palmer looked around, realizing he was completely isolated. The crowd of witnesses had grown larger, with more phones recording the scene. Sarah Chen's live stream had already reached hundreds of thousands of views. Comments were pouring in from medical professionals, civil rights activists, and concerned citizens across the country. "If anything happens," Palmer started to say, but Amanda cut him off. "The only thing that's going to happen," she said firmly, "is Dr. Bennett is going to board her flight and save her patient's life. Then you and I are going to have a very serious conversation with terminal management about your behavior today." The younger pilot stepped forward and picked up Dr. Bennett's overnight bag. "Let me help you with that, doctor. We're ready when you are." His simple act of courtesy stood in stark contrast to Palmer's discrimination. Maya nodded gratefully, her focus already shifting to the surgery ahead. As Amanda led her past the checkpoint, the crowd parted respectfully. Sarah Chen followed, still recording, ensuring that every moment was documented. Palmer stood frozen, his authority stripped away, as he watched Dr. Bennett walk toward her waiting plane. Behind them, the elderly businessman could be heard on his phone. "Yes, I want to file a formal complaint. I just witnessed the most disgraceful display of discrimination." His voice faded as the group moved toward the terminal's private gates, leaving Palmer to face the consequences of his actions. Sarah Chen sat in her own delayed flight, her hands still shaking as she watched her video spread across the internet like wildfire. In just 3 hours since the incident, her recording had reached over 2 million views. Her phone hadn't stopped buzzing with notifications, messages, and calls from news organizations. Discrimination at Elite Airport. Top brain surgeon blocked from emergency flight. Read one headline after another. Sarah's video was being shared by celebrities, civil rights activists, and medical professionals across every social media platform. The hashtag #LetDurbanetFly had evolved into #DurbanetStrong and #EndDiscriminationNow. Major news networks were already running the story in their breaking news segments. Sarah watched as clips from her video played on the airport lounge's TV screens, surreal evidence of how quickly the morning's events had captured national attention. Reporters were particularly focused on the moment when Palmer had dismissed Dr. Bennett's Harvard and Johns Hopkins credentials. "This is what we deal with every day," wrote one black female doctor, sharing the video. "Even with all our degrees and achievements, people still try to stop us from doing our jobs." Her comment had been shared over 50,000 times in just 1 hour. The elderly businessman who had witnessed everything, now identified as retired Judge William Harrison, had given a powerful interview to a local news station right from the terminal. "In my 40 years of law practice, I've seen discrimination take many forms," he said, his voice firm. "But to see someone try to prevent a surgeon from saving a life, that's a new low." Comments flooded every post of the video. "She's literally trying to save someone's life. The way she stayed professional the whole time. Amazing strength. This security guard needs to be fired immediately." Look at her credentials, Harvard and Hopkins, and he still tried to stop her? Medical associations began releasing statements. The American Medical Association tweeted, "Discrimination has no place in healthcare. Dr. Bennett represents the best of our profession, and we stand with her." The statement was accompanied by a photo of Dr. Bennett receiving an award at last year's medical conference. Sarah's phone rang again, another news network requesting an interview. As she declined the call, she saw a new message pop up. It was from her old college professor. "Thank you for recording this. People need to see what really happens." The terminal where it had happened was being flooded with calls and online reviews. Their social media pages were overwhelmed with comments demanding action. People were sharing their own stories of discrimination at airports, creating a larger conversation about systemic racism in supposedly elite spaces. Dr. Bennett's patient's family had also learned about the incident. Their statement to the press was heartbreaking. "While we are grateful Dr. Bennett made it in time to save our daughter, we are horrified that she faced such discrimination while trying to help us. No one should face racism while trying to save lives." Aviation experts began weighing in on the controversy. Private terminals often pride themselves on customer service, one analyst explained on a news show. This incident exposes a darker side of how that service can be selectively applied based on race. The video had also caught the attention of civil rights organizations. The NAACP released a statement. Dr. Bennett's experience highlights the ongoing battle against racial discrimination in all spaces, even those presumed to be reserved for society's elite. Her composure in the face of such blatant prejudice speaks to the extraordinary burden placed on professionals of color. Meanwhile, Sarah's original video continued to gain views. Social media users had started digging into the terminal's history, finding other instances of discriminatory behavior that had gone unreported. The hashtag terminal racism started trending, linking to similar stories from around the country. By early afternoon, the clip showing Amanda Torres intervening had become its own viral moment, with people praising her immediate action and clear stance against discrimination. "This is Have You a Lie," wrote one viral tweet. "No hesitation, no excuses, just immediate action to stop racism." Sarah looked at her phone's latest notification, a message from Dr. Bennett herself. "Thank you for being brave enough to record what happened. The surgery was successful. Sometimes the most important thing we can do is simply bear witness to the truth." Sarah felt tears in her eyes as she read those words, knowing that her decision to hit record that morning had helped expose a truth that could no longer be ignored. The aviation company's CEO, Thomas Martinez, sat in his office, watching the viral video for the 10th time that day. His phone hadn't stopped ringing since morning. News vans were parked outside their corporate headquarters, and hashtag terminal racism was still the #1 trending topic on social media. He knew they had to act fast. "Get me Palmer's complete employment record," he ordered his HR director, "and schedule an emergency board meeting for this afternoon." The company's stock had dropped 5% since the market opened, and major clients were calling to express their concerns. Meanwhile, Palmer sat in a small office down the hall, his security badge confiscated. He stared at the wall, still trying to justify his actions. "I was just doing my job," he muttered to himself, but the words sounded hollow even to his own ears. His supervisor had already shown him dozens of instances from the security cameras where he had let white passengers through with minimal checks. The terminal's morning shift staff had been called into a mandatory meeting. Amanda Torres, still angry from the morning's events, presented clear evidence of discriminatory patterns in their security protocols. "This isn't just about one incident," she explained, showing slides of data she had gathered over months. "Our own numbers show that we've been applying different standards to different passengers based on race." Back at corporate headquarters, the board meeting was intense. Member after member expressed their shock and dismay at the video. The company's reputation, built over 50 years, was at risk. Their legal team presented a preliminary report that made everyone in the room uncomfortable. "We found 27 similar complaints filed in the past year alone," the lead counsel explained. "Most were quietly resolved. This pattern shows a systemic problem." She paused before adding, "And now that Dr. Bennett's case is public, we expect more people to come forward." Thomas Martinez made a decision. He stood up and faced his board members. "We're going to handle this differently," he announced. No cover-ups, no quiet settlements. We're going to make real changes. He outlined a comprehensive plan that would reshape their entire security approach. Within hours, the company released its first public statement. We deeply regret the discriminatory treatment Dr. Maya Bennett experienced at our terminal. Effective immediately, Security Officer Richard Palmer has been terminated. This incident has exposed serious flaws in our system, and we are taking immediate action to address them. The statement went on to announce several major changes: a complete review of all security protocols, mandatory anti-bias training for all employees, creation of a diversity and inclusion officer position, independent audit of past discrimination complaints, new clear guidelines for passenger verification, installation of body cameras for all security personnel, formation of a community advisory board. Palmer received his termination notice by email that afternoon. As he read it, his phone buzzed with messages from friends who had seen the video. Some defended him, but others expressed disappointment and anger. His own daughter, a medical student, had sent him a text. "Dad, how could you do this to another human being? She's a doctor trying to save lives." The aviation company's actions sparked a broader industry response. Other private aviation companies began reviewing their own practices. The National Business Aviation Association announced plans for an industry-wide study on discrimination in private air travel. Amanda Torres was promoted to head of terminal operations, with a specific mandate to implement the new anti-discrimination policies. Her first act was to create a clear appeals process for any passenger who felt unfairly treated by security. Civil rights lawyers reached out to Dr. Bennett, offering to represent her in a lawsuit. But Dr. Bennett had other ideas. Through her hospital, she released a statement. "I'm more interested in creating change than pursuing legal action. I want to work with the aviation industry to ensure this never happens to anyone else." The company's stock began to recover as investors responded positively to their transparent approach to the crisis. Industry analysts praised their quick action and comprehensive response. One expert noted, "They're turning a moment of shame into an opportunity for real reform." By evening, Palmer's desk had been cleared out, and new security training materials were being developed. The company had scheduled sensitivity training sessions for all employees starting the very next day. A clear message had been sent. Discrimination would no longer be tolerated, no matter how elite the setting or important the position. 1 week after the incident, Dr. Maya Bennett stood at a podium in the private aviation terminal's main lobby. The same space where she had faced discrimination now hosted a press conference to announce major changes in the industry. Camera flashes lit up the room as she addressed the crowd. "Last week, I was just trying to reach a patient who needed my help," she began, her voice clear and strong. "Today, I'm here to help create lasting change." Behind her stood Thomas Martinez, the aviation company's CEO, along with leaders from 5 other major private aviation firms. The company had invited Dr. Bennett to help shape their new policies. Instead of filing a lawsuit, she had chosen to work with them to prevent similar incidents in the future. Her experience as a Black woman in medicine gave her unique insights into how institutions could become more inclusive. Amanda Torres, newly promoted to Director of Terminal Operations, presented the concrete changes already implemented. All security staff now wore body cameras. A new app allowed passengers to report discrimination instantly. Security checkpoints had clear, standardized procedures posted. Multiple supervisors monitored security interactions. A diverse community advisory board reviewed policies monthly. Sarah Chen, whose video had exposed the discrimination, sat in the front row. Her social media following had doubled since the incident, and she now used her platform to highlight stories of discrimination and positive change. She live-streamed the press conference to her millions of followers. The response has been overwhelming, Thomas Martinez told the audience. Other companies in private aviation, healthcare transportation, and security services have reached out to learn from our new approach. He announced the creation of an industry-wide task force to combat discrimination, with Dr. Bennett serving as a key advisor. The former security guard, Richard Palmer, had become an example of what not to do in training sessions across the country. His recorded actions were now used to teach security personnel about unconscious bias and professional responsibility. Meanwhile, Palmer himself had been unable to find work in security, as the viral video followed him to every job interview. Dr. Bennett introduced a new scholarship program funded by the aviation company. We're creating opportunities for minority students in both aviation and medicine. Sometimes barriers need to be broken in multiple places at once. The company had committed $5 million to the initiative. The terminal's new training program, developed with Dr. Bennett's input, went far beyond typical diversity sessions. Security staff participated in role-playing exercises, learned about medical transport protocols, and heard directly from professionals of color about their experiences. Amanda Torres shared some early results. In just 1 week, we've seen a complete transformation in how our staff approaches security. Every passenger now receives the same respectful, professional treatment. The terminal's customer satisfaction scores had actually improved under the new standardized procedures. The young patient whose life Dr. Bennett had saved that day was also present at the press conference. 19-year-old Emily Rodriguez stood with tears in her eyes as she thanked Dr. Bennett. If she hadn't made it to me that morning, I might not be here today. No one should face racism while trying to save lives. Dr. Bennett's colleagues from the hospital attended to show their support. Many shared their own stories of facing discrimination in professional settings. What happened to Dr. Bennett happens to professionals of color every day, one doctor noted. The difference is that this time it was caught on video. The aviation company's approach to the crisis had become a case study in corporate responsibility. Instead of trying to minimize the incident, they had used it as a catalyst for genuine change. Their stock price had not only recovered but reached new highs as investors responded to their leadership in addressing industry-wide problems. At the end of the press conference, Dr. Bennett made one final announcement. Starting next month, I'll be conducting emergency surgery training sessions for aviation staff. They'll learn why medical transport is time-critical and how they can better support healthcare professionals. As the cameras flashed and reporters called out questions, Dr. Bennett stood confident and composed. The same quiet strength she had shown during the confrontation now directed toward creating positive change. The terminal where she had once been blocked had transformed into a launching pad for industry-wide reform. Sarah Chen captured it all on video, just as she had done a week ago. But this time, her footage showed something different. Not discrimination being exposed, but progress being made. Her followers watched in real time as a moment of injustice transformed into a movement for change. 6 months after the incident that changed private aviation, Dr. Maya Bennett stood in a large conference room at Harvard Medical School. She was giving a special lecture, but not about brain surgery. Instead, she spoke to a mixed audience of medical and aviation students about breaking barriers and creating change. What happened that morning was just one moment, she told the packed room. But what happened afterward shows how a single incident can transform an entire industry. The screen behind her showed photographs of the many changes that had taken place over the past 6 months. The private aviation company's new training program, now known as the Bennett Protocol, had been adopted by over 50 airlines and private terminals across the country. Security staff everywhere wore body cameras, followed clear checkpoint procedures, and received regular anti-bias training. The number of reported discrimination incidents had dropped by 70%. Sarah Chen, sitting in the audience, smiled as she remembered that morning. Her viral video had launched her into a new career as a social justice documentarian. She now traveled the country, recording stories of both discrimination and positive change. Her latest documentary, 8 Minutes That Changed Aviation, was set to premiere on a major streaming platform next month. Amanda Torres had been promoted again, this time to the aviation company's National Board of Directors. Under her leadership, the company had created a comprehensive diversity and inclusion program that was becoming the industry standard. We don't just want to prevent discrimination, she often said in interviews. We want to create a culture of genuine respect. The scholarship program Dr. Bennett had helped establish was already showing results. 15 minority students were now studying aviation management with full funding, and 10 medical students had received grants for specialized training in emergency medicine. The program was expanding to include internships and mentoring. Emily Rodriguez, the young patient Dr. Bennett had saved that day, had recovered completely and was now pre-med at her university. Dr. Bennett saved more than my life, she told reporters. She showed me that one person can overcome discrimination and help change the system for everyone. The former security guard, Richard Palmer, had eventually found work at a small warehouse, far from any position of authority. His story was now featured in corporate training videos nationwide as an example of how bias could blind someone to their own discriminatory behavior. Some companies even used the security camera footage from that morning to teach their employees what not to do. Dr. Bennett's medical practice had grown, with patients coming from around the country seeking her expertise. But more importantly, she had established the Bennett Foundation for Equal Access in Medicine and Transportation. The foundation worked to identify and eliminate barriers that prevented medical professionals from reaching their patients. The private aviation industry had undergone a complete transformation. Security checkpoints now had clear, posted procedures that applied equally to everyone. Wait times had actually decreased under the new standardized system, proving that fairness and efficiency could go hand in hand. But our work isn't finished, Dr. Bennett told her audience. Change isn't a destination, it's a journey. She shared statistics showing that while major private terminals had improved, smaller airports and regional facilities still needed help implementing similar reforms. In the audience was Thomas Martinez, who had recently retired as CEO, but remained active in promoting industry reform. Dr. Bennett taught us that addressing discrimination isn't just about avoiding bad publicity, he said during the Q&A session. It's about building a better, more efficient, and more just system for everyone. The elderly judge who had witnessed the original incident had become a regular speaker at aviation security conferences. I've seen a lot of changes in my lifetime, he would tell audiences, but rarely have I seen an industry transform itself so completely and sincerely. As Dr. Bennett concluded her lecture, she shared a final thought. That morning, I was just trying to reach a patient who needed surgery. But sometimes, when one door is closed to us, we end up opening many doors for others. She looked out at the diverse faces in her audience: future doctors, pilots, aviation managers, and security personnel. Your generation has the power to ensure that what happened to me becomes a story from the past, not a reality in the present. The lecture hall erupted in applause. Among those clapping were executives from other industries: banking, hotels, retail, all there to learn how they could implement similar changes in their own fields. What had started as one doctor being blocked from boarding a plane had grown into a movement for change across corporate America.